I'll never forget when I was a child, my dad would not eat the egg yolks because he thought it was going to raise his cholesterol. This is while he's taking the statin drug. Um, so is there some truth to that? Is there some truth to eating cholesterol is going to raise your cholesterol? And if not, what foods will affect your cholesterol?
Yeah. So another great question. There is a small proportion of people who do respond to dietary cholesterol, they're termed hyper responders. So when they eat dietary cholesterol, it will raise their levels. But for the vast majority of people, the liver is the main site of cholesterol production. So when you start to take in more cholesterol in the diet, the cholesterol will actually be adjusted in terms of production at the liver. So you won't actually, your liver will just not produce as much cholesterol. So I think even the major regulating bodies have adjusted and said dietary cholesterol does not necessarily lead to elevated cholesterol levels inside the blood. Now, what they haven't removed, if I remember correctly, they haven't removed the warning for saturated fats, which saturated fats comparatively to monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats do tend to actually raise cholesterol levels. However, many times they tend to raise total cholesterol levels, including LDL and HDL, depending on the saturated fat, right? Because there's different types of saturated fats. Now, something else to consider is that the polyunsaturated fats don't necessarily, they directly lower the cholesterol levels through a variety of mechanisms, some of which aren't ideal, and the saturated fats are raising. So when you're looking at this comparative shift, it's saturated fat will give you more cholesterol than polys because polys are lowering and the saturated fat are raising through different mechanisms, whereas monounsaturated fat tends to be a bit more neutral overall. So the three different types of fats will have an effect. Dietary cholesterol in a specific subgroup of people, you'll see an effect, but it's not everybody's just going to have an egg yolk and see their cholesterol skyrocket. It's a very small subset of people will see that. So it's mainly around adjusting different fat intake, but even then it's still relatively negligible. I'm not seeing 100-point swings in cholesterol levels in my clients, but between, like, if they're having a bit more saturated versus monounsaturated fat, it's more whether they're low carb or high carb, or if they have metabolic dysfunction. Those are the biggest drivers, or the infections or hypothyroidism that's moving the lipid panel in individuals.
So I know you're not a fan of PUFAs, but right now I just heard you say that they lower cholesterol. Can you connect the dots there?
Yes. So, and this is the major argument for the consumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which is PUFAs, is that they lower cholesterol levels and therefore lower cardiovascular risk by lowering cholesterol levels. Now, it is true that they lower cholesterol levels. However, the polyunsaturated fatty acids have a very fragile structure, and that fragile structure is very likely to be oxidized under multiple circumstances inside the body, outside the body, in the digestive tract. And so one of the major drivers of cardiovascular disease is not necessarily just LDL by itself, LDL cholesterol. It's oxidized LDL cholesterol. And so since the polyunsaturated fatty acids are very liable or very likely to oxidize, if you incorporate a large amount of them, there's a theory out there called the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid oxidized cholesterol theory, or oxidized LDL theory, where essentially if you incorporate large amounts of these fats inside your LDL cholesterol, it is more likely to create oxidized LDL cholesterol, and the oxidized LDL cholesterol is what's driving the cardiovascular disease. So even though the cholesterol levels can drop with polyunsaturated fatty acids, if they are increasing oxidative stress and increasing oxidized cholesterol, then over the long term, the concern would be that they would actually worsen cardiovascular disease. And so you basically have a situation now where, number one, if the LDL cholesterol is becoming oxidized by the polyunsaturated fatty acids, is the lowering effect enough to offset the oxidative effect? And we don't actually have answers for that. And then what is the long-term effect of that? Not to mention the effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids on metabolic health, mitochondrial health, etc. So there's more to the story than just lowering or raising cholesterol overall. And this speaks to what I talked about in the beginning, is that the cholesterol is just one point or one piece of the picture. You have to have vascular dysfunction going on, endothelial dysfunction inside the arteries and the veins. And then you need to have depositing of cholesterol and oxidation of the cholesterol first before deposition, before you start to see these problems arise. So you have oxidation plus inflammation and vascular damage with cholesterol present, and oftentimes immune activation. So it's like a multi-piece picture going on inside the vasculature, not just, oh, cholesterol's there and it binds into the wall, which is the imagery that we were shown in the different saturated fat causes heart disease and cholesterol causes heart disease and statin commercials, where you see this butter and it's like, oh, the butter is just going to stick in my artery. It's like, that's a little bit more, it's a little bit more entailing than that. And there's multiple pieces going on. So when I'm thinking about cardiovascular disease with a client, what I'm thinking about is what's going on with their oxidative stress, what's going on at the vascular level. Do they have vascular inflammation? Do they have immune activation going on? And then what's going on with their lipid panel as well. So there's multiple factors I'm considering, and then also metabolic dysfunction. And I'm thinking about a risk profile from these different values. So I'm not just looking at a lipid panel. I'm looking at multiple different values simultaneously, engaging in each of these buckets. Like, where is the major issue going on? Is this person driving oxidative stress? Do I need to correct that? Is this person having metabolic dysfunction? Is that what needs to be corrected? Is there vascular dysfunction? Do we need to correct that? Do they already have vascular calcification? Do we need to adjust that? And trying to use multiple tools at my disposal to minimize somebody's cardiovascular risk, instead of just relying and putting all my eggs in one basket on cholesterol.